I saw in my own son's eyes the same empty gaze my great-grandfather had before he tried to strangle his sister. That's when I knew. My family's nightmare had returned. Good afternoon, my dears. This is Dorothy Williams, 72 years young, speaking to you from my little home in Missoula, Montana, nestled right against the Rocky Mountains. That mountain breeze is such a blessing when the summer heat hits, you know? Today I'm here to share with you a story I've kept buried in my heart for more than 30 years. A story of love, pain, and how fate sometimes sets traps we could never imagine. But before I begin this difficult journey, I'd like to ask a small favor from the heart. Please subscribe to Grandparents' Tales, hit that like button, it costs nothing, and tell me in the comments what part of the country you're watching from. I'd love to know your name too. I cherish reading each of your comments. They make me feel less alone in this big house that now holds only me and my memories. I was born in 1953 in a simple but tidy house in the east side of Missoula. My parents, Arthur and Eleanor, were hardworking folks. Dad was a carpenter who made furniture that was truly works of art, with those curves and carvings you hardly see anymore. Mom sewed for clients, making formal dresses mainly. Our house was always filled with colorful fabrics, laces, and ribbons she used in her work. I had a happy childhood, you know. I played outside with the neighborhood kids, walked to school hand in hand with my older sister, Margaret. Our house wasn't fancy, but we never lacked food on the table, or love. And oh, how much love there was in that house. My father, even exhausted from work, always found time to tell bedtime stories. My mother hummed all day while sewing, making the house seem brighter, more alive. The only shadow in our family came from stories about my paternal great-grandfather, Nathaniel. He died long before I was born, but stories about him were whispered by adults when they thought children weren't listening. They said he had problems in the head, that sometimes he'd go days without sleeping, talking nonsense, seeing people who weren't there. That once he tried to strangle his own sister because he believed she had been replaced by a snake disguised as a person. "It runs in the blood," my grandmother would whisper to my mother. Thank God it skipped a generation. Neither my father nor I had it. I grew up hearing these stories like ghost tales, with that shiver down the spine, but knowing it was something from the past that wouldn't affect me. How wrong I was, dear Lord. But let's take this slowly. This story is long, and I want to tell you everything properly. I finished school at 18 in the early 70s. It was a beautiful time, you know? We dreamed, had hope for the future, despite all the country's difficulties. I got a job as a secretary at an accounting firm downtown. I didn't earn much, but I helped at home and still had a little left over to buy lipstick, a new pair of sandals once in a while. It was at that office that I met Philip. Oh my goodness, Philip. Just saying his name, even after so many years, still makes my heart skip a little. He was an accountant, freshly graduated, and moved from Seattle to work in our town. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair and, what stood out most, those honey-colored eyes, almost golden in the sunlight. A handsome man, you see, and not just because he was my husband, but he truly was something to look at when he walked by. I remember our first meeting like it was yesterday. He walked into the office carrying a stack of folders he could barely balance. I was organizing some documents, and when I looked up, I saw this awkward young man trying not to drop everything on the floor. I rushed to help. Our hands touched for a moment. And that was it. Like lightning, you know? That electric current that runs through your whole body when you meet someone special. "Thank you very much," he said, smiling in that way I would later discover was uniquely his. "I'm Philip, the new accountant." "Dorothy," I replied, feeling my face heat up. "Welcome to the firm." It took him 3 whole weeks to ask me out. 3 weeks of exchanged smiles in the hallways, excuses to come to my desk to ask about some client, shared coffee in the small office break room. When he finally got the courage, it was to invite me to see Love Story at the cinema. I accepted immediately, of course. We dated for 2 years, with all the respect that was expected in those days. He would pick me up at home, chat with my parents in the living room, take me for walks in the park, for ice cream, to the movies when there was something good playing. At town dances, we'd dance together, but always with that little space that adults kept watching. You know how it was. It was a beautiful courtship. Unhurried. Philip was different from other young men I knew. Gentle, attentive, respectful. He never raised his voice, even when we disagreed on something. He had that calm way of resolving things, talking, explaining his point of view. And he treated me like a queen. He brought flowers on random days, remembered small details I mentioned, made a point of introducing me to everyone as the most beautiful and intelligent woman in Missoula. In 1975, he proposed. It was on a Sunday, after lunch at my parents' house. He asked to speak privately with my father, and they were locked in the small room that served as his carpentry workshop for almost an hour. When they came out, my father had misty eyes but a smile on his face. Philip came to me, knelt right there in front of the whole family, and took out a small box with a simple but beautiful ring. "Dorothy," he said, his voice trembling a little, "will you marry me and make me the happiest man in the world?" I don't need to tell you that I accepted, right? Right away. The whole family applauded. My mother cried. My cousins immediately started discussing the dress, the cake, the flowers. We married 6 months later in a simple ceremony at First Presbyterian Church. We didn't have much money, but our families came together to make a beautiful celebration. My mother and aunts spent weeks preparing sweets and savories. My father insisted on building the cake table with his own hands. Friends took turns helping with the church and reception hall decorations. My dress wasn't the most luxurious, but it was made with so much love by my mother and godmother that to me it was the most beautiful in the world. Delicate lace, tiny pearls sewn one by one onto the bodice, a modest but elegant train. When I looked in the mirror that day, I barely recognized the young woman staring back. She looked like a princess from the stories my father told when I was little. Philip waited at the altar, handsome in his navy blue suit, the only one he owned, but impeccably pressed and fitted for the occasion. When our eyes met, I saw tears in his. Later, he confessed, "When I saw you walking into the church, Dorothy, I thought my heart would explode with happiness." We started our life together in a small but cozy apartment near downtown. 2 bedrooms, a living room kitchen combo, and a tiny bathroom. It wasn't much, but to us it seemed like a palace. We decorated with simple furniture, some made by my father, others bought on installment plans. I planted geraniums in the windows, sewed colorful curtains, arranged every corner with the greatest care. Philip continued working at the accounting firm, and I, after marriage, started making cakes and sweets to order from home. I always enjoyed cooking, and soon my brownies, peanut brittle, and celebration cakes became known in the neighborhood. It wasn't steady income like the office job, but it helped with the bills and allowed me to stay home, preparing our nest, because that was our dream, to have a child. From the first days of marriage, we talked about it. What it would be like, what name we would give, how we would raise them. Philip wanted a boy to play ball with, to teach fishing on weekends. I dreamed of a little girl to dress with ribbons, to teach family recipes. But deep down, what we really wanted was a healthy child, whether boy or girl. The first months of marriage were pure joy. Getting to know each other, learning to live together, making plans. Waking up beside him every day, preparing coffee together before he left for work, greeting him with a little kiss when he returned in the late afternoon. It was a simple happiness, but so complete that sometimes I caught myself afraid. Afraid it was too good to last. At night, lying in our bed, we talked about the future. Philip dreamed of opening his own accounting firm one day. I thought about turning my sweet making into something bigger, maybe a small bakery. And of course, we planned our family. "I want at least 3 children," Philip would say, hugging me. A house full of kids running around, laughing. "3?" I would reply, pretending to be shocked. "Let's start with 1, and then we'll talk." And we would laugh and kiss and try, month after month, to make that dream come true. After a year of trying without success, we started to worry. Was something wrong? We visited doctors, had tests done. Everything normal, they said. "It's just a matter of time and patience," they assured us. "You're young, healthy, it will happen." And it did. In June 1977, I finally discovered I was pregnant. Oh my God, what a day that was. I took the test at the health clinic in the morning and spent the whole day planning how to break the news to Philip. I prepared his favorite dinner, steak with potato salad, like the good Midwesterner he was, set the table with our special lace tablecloth saved for special occasions, even put flowers in a vase. When he arrived home from work, he found all this unusual preparation strange. "Is it our wedding anniversary and I forgot?" he asked, worried. "No, my love," I answered, barely able to hold back my smile. "But we have something to celebrate." During dinner, we talked about his day, about trivial things. I was almost bursting with the desire to tell him, but holding back for the right moment. When we served dessert, apple pie, which he loved, I placed a small package on the table. "What's this?" he asked, surprised. "Open it to find out," I replied, my heart beating fast. Inside the little box was a tiny pair of crocheted booties that my neighbor had helped me make that very afternoon. Philip looked at the booties, then at me, then back at the booties again. For a moment, he seemed not to understand. Then his eyes widened, filled with tears. "Dorothy, are you?" I nodded, already crying too. "We're having a baby, Philip. I'm 2 months pregnant." He got up from his chair so quickly he almost knocked it over, came around the table and hugged me tight, lifting me off the ground and spinning me around our small living room. We laughed and cried at the same time, embracing, hardly believing our dream was finally coming true. That night, lying in bed, Philip placed his hand on my still flat stomach and stayed like that, in silence, as if he could already feel the baby growing inside. "I'm going to be the best father in the world," he promised, his voice breaking. "I'll teach everything I know. I'll always be present. I'll love this child with all my strength." "I know you will," I replied, running my hand through his hair. "You're already the best husband in the world. You'll be a wonderful father." The pregnancy was smooth, thank God. I was a bit nauseous in the first few months, but nothing that prevented me from continuing with my duties, my sweet orders. Philip became even more attentive, if that was possible. He would come home from work with some fruit I was craving, massage my feet when they swelled at the end of the day, read books about babies and child development with such dedication that sometimes I joked he was more pregnant than I was. In the 5th month, we found out we were having a boy. Philip was so happy he went around telling the whole town. "His name will be Charles Philip," he announced to anyone who would listen. "He'll be an accountant like his dad, or a doctor, or an engineer. Whatever he wants to be." We prepared the baby's room with so much love. The walls, which were white before, got a light blue paint job with little white clouds that my cousin, who had a knack for drawing, spent an entire Sunday creating. The crib was a gift from my parents. My father insisted on building it with his own hands, using the finest wood he could find. My mother and my aunts took turns making the layette: sheets, swaddling cloths, blankets, tiny clothes that I stored in the dresser, running my hand over each piece, imagining the little face that would soon fill those clothes. The last months were pure anticipation. The belly already big, the baby's movements increasingly strong, as if he were anxious to meet the world. Philip talked to my belly every night, told about his day, sang lullabies, made promises. "I'll take you fishing as soon as you're a little bigger," he would say. "I'll teach you to play football, to ride a bike, to be a good man." Charlie was born on a cold January morning in 1978, after almost 12 hours of labor. A chubby baby, rosy-cheeked, with a head of black hair that surprised even the doctors. "Looks like he was born already combed," joked the nurse. When they placed him in my arms for the first time, I felt a love I didn't know was possible. It was as if my heart had doubled in size to accommodate all that feeling. Philip beside me cried without any shame, his eyes fixed on the small bundle that was our son. "He's perfect," he whispered, gently running his finger along the baby's cheek. "Thank you, my love. Thank you for giving me this gift." We returned home 3 days later, and our life entered a new phase. Sleepless nights, diapers to change, bottles to prepare, cries to decipher. But each challenge came with so much joy that we hardly felt the tiredness. Charlie's first smile, first tooth, first time he turned over in bed by himself. Each milestone was celebrated as if it were the greatest achievement in the world. Philip proved to be the father he promised to be. Even tired from work, he would come home and go straight to the crib, pick up his son, play with him, help with the bath, tell stories. On weekends, he would put Charlie in the stroller and go for walks around town, proud, showing off his son to all the acquaintances he met along the way. "Look how smart he is," he would say. "He already recognizes our voices. He already holds the rattle by himself." My dears, looking back at those early years, everything seemed so perfect. We had a beautiful family, a happy marriage, a healthy son who was growing strong and intelligent. How could I imagine that fate held such a cruel twist for us? How could I know that the same blood that ran in my great-grandfather Nathaniel's veins, the one from those whispered stories, also ran in my boy's veins? But I'm getting ahead of myself. These memories sometimes confuse me, you know? One moment I'm here, smelling fresh baked bread coming out of the oven, hearing my little boy's laughter as he runs through the house. The next moment I'm years ahead, seeing everything crumble like a sandcastle. My loves, if you've made it this far in the story, type "I'm listening" in the comments, so I know there are people out there following me on this difficult journey. In the next segment, I'll tell you about the golden years of our family before the shadows began to appear. Stay with me, okay? Charlie's childhood was like a dream, my dears. Those first years brought so much happiness that even now, decades later, when I close my eyes, I can still smell that baby scent, hear those delicious giggles echoing through the house, see those curious eyes discovering the world. From an early age, my son showed unusual intelligence. At just 1 year old, he was already speaking clear words. Mama, Dada, water, while other children his age were still babbling. By 2, he was forming complete sentences that amazed his daycare teachers. "Mrs. Williams, this boy is a prodigy," they'd say when I picked him up. "He talks like a tiny adult." Philip was so proud his chest nearly burst the buttons on his shirt. He bought a Super 8 camera in 12 painful installments, an incredible luxury for our circumstances back then, just to record every moment of his son's development. On weekends, he'd transform our living room into a cinema, projecting onto the white wall home movies of Charlie taking his first steps, blowing out candles, playing in the park. "This boy will go far," he'd say, his eyes shining with expectation. "He has his mother's intelligence and his father's determination. He'll be a doctor, maybe even a politician." When Charlie turned 3 in 1981, we knew we needed a bigger home. Our little apartment, which once seemed like a palace, was now too small for that boy's energy. He needed space to run, to explore, to grow. Fortunately, Philip's business was going well. He'd been promoted to manager at the accounting firm, and my cake orders had a loyal clientele that allowed me to contribute significantly to the family budget. We saved for months and managed to put a down payment on a simple but spacious house in the Pleasant View neighborhood. It had a backyard with a big maple tree, 3 bedrooms, 1 for us, 1 for Charlie, and 1 we dreamed of turning into a room for the second child we planned to have. In front, a small porch where I placed pots of geraniums and ferns, making that space my little corner of peace. The move to the new house coincided with Charlie's entry into preschool. We chose carefully Little Sprouts Learning Center, which had an excellent reputation and was only 4 blocks from home. On the first day, I prepared him with all the love: impeccably ironed uniform, lunchbox with sandwiches, fruit and a brownie surprise, hair combed with gel, smelling of children's cologne. "You're going to love school, sweetheart," I explained as we walked hand in hand. "You'll make many friends, learn new things, play a lot." He looked at me with those big, serious eyes, the same honey-colored eyes as his father, and answered with a maturity that surprised me. "I know, Mom. I'll be the best student in the class." And he was. Charlie adapted to school like a fish to water. In a few weeks, the teachers were already commenting on his ease in learning, his creativity in drawings, his natural leadership among the other children. At home, he asked us to read to him every night, not children's stories, but grown-up books, as he called them. At not quite 4 years old, he already recognized all the letters and could put some together into simple words. Philip, radiant with pride, brought increasingly advanced children's books, puzzles with more pieces, educational games that stimulated reasoning. He would spend hours on the living room floor, building block cities with his son, inventing fantastic stories about brave princes and mysterious dragons, answering with infinite patience the curious questions the boy had about how things worked. From clocks to stars, from planes to ants. Why is the sky blue, Dad? How do fish breathe underwater? Where does the sun go at night? The questions never stopped, and Philip made a point of seeking real, scientific answers, never underestimating his son's intelligence. Our routine found a nice rhythm in those years. Philip would leave early for work, I would take Charlie to school, then return home to prepare the day's sweet orders. In the afternoon, I'd pick up our boy and we'd spend a few hours together, doing homework, playing in the backyard, preparing the dinner that Philip would find when he returned from the office. During school vacations, we would take small trips, usually to visit Charlie's paternal grandparents in Seattle, or to spend a few days at the beach in Oregon. They weren't luxurious vacations. We stayed in simple motels, took home-prepared food to save money. But they were precious moments, filled with simple joys like sandcastles, ice cream on the beach, boat rides on the lakes. I remember one of these trips, in January 1983, when Charlie was 5 years old. We were at the beach on a sunny afternoon. Philip had gone to buy popsicles for us, and I was watching Charlie playing in the wet sand, concentrated on building an elaborate system of channels where the seawater would flow in and out. Suddenly, an older boy, must have been about 8 or 9, came running and deliberately stepped right in the middle of the construction, destroying everything. I immediately stood up, ready to intervene, to console my son who would certainly start crying. But to my surprise, Charlie didn't cry. He looked at the boy with a strangely calm expression and said, in a voice that didn't seem to belong to a child, "You're going to regret that." The older boy laughed mockingly. "And what are you going to do, baby? Cry for mommy?" Charlie continued to stare at him, motionless, with that fixed gaze that, for an instant, just a flash, reminded me of the stories about my great-grandfather. Then, without warning, he grabbed a handful of wet sand and threw it directly into the boy's eyes, who fell backward, screaming in pain. "Charlie!" I exclaimed, running to them. "What did you do?" He turned to me, and his face was again that of my sweet boy, with eyes wide with shock, as if he himself didn't understand what he had just done. "He destroyed my castle, Mom," he answered, his voice trembling. I got angry. The incident was quickly resolved. I apologized to the other boy's mother, explained that Charlie had never done anything like this before, that it had just been an impulsive reaction. On the way back to the motel, I had a serious talk with my son about how we must control our impulses, about how hurting others is never the solution. Even when we're very angry, Charlie, we can't hurt people. Do you understand? He nodded, seeming genuinely sorry. "I'm sorry, Mom. I don't know what happened. It was like someone else threw the sand." At the time, I interpreted it as just a child's way of avoiding responsibility. Only years later did I realize that perhaps, just maybe, there was more truth in that statement than I could imagine. But that was just an isolated episode. In general, Charlie was a sweet, affectionate, obedient boy. All the neighbors, the teachers, the family friends commented on how polite, helpful, and intelligent he was. "A boy of gold," they said, and he was, at least in those golden years of childhood. When Charlie turned 7 in 1985, something happened that would profoundly mark our family. Philip, who had been working double shifts at the office, finally managed to gather enough capital to open his own business. With the help of a partner, George, a friend from college days, he founded Frontier Accounting, a modest office, but with big ambitions. It was a period of hard work, sleepless nights, sacrificed weekends. Philip would come home exhausted, but with a gleam in his eyes that spoke of dreams coming true. I did my best to support him, prepared nutritious meals for him to take to work, made sure the house was always in order, protecting the few hours he had at home so he could rest or spend quality time with his son. Charlie, even young, seemed to understand the importance of that moment. He didn't complain when his father missed a school presentation or arrived too late for a goodnight kiss. Instead, he showed interest in the new business, asked to visit the office on weekends, watched fascinated as Philip explained about balance sheets, taxes, accounting. "When I grow up, I'm going to work with you, Dad," he announced once, sitting in the swivel chair that was too big for his little body. "We'll be partners," Philip smiled, touched, and messed up his son's hair. "Of course we will, champ. The company will be called Williams & Son. What do you think?" Philip's effort paid off. In just 2 years, Frontier Accounting already had a respectable portfolio of clients, including some of the most important merchants in Missoula and even some from neighboring towns. With the business thriving, we could finally realize other dreams. We traded the old Volkswagen for a brand new Chevy. What a luxury that car was, my God. Renovated the kitchen, enrolled Charlie in a private school, the best in town. In 1988, when our son turned 10, we decided to throw a special birthday party. In previous years, we had celebrated simply: a small cake at home, a few little friends invited, modest presents. But now, with the financial situation more stable, we wanted to celebrate in style. We rented the hall at the community center, hired a superhero-themed decoration. Charlie was fanatic about Spider-Man. I ordered a 3-tier cake decorated with all the comic book characters he collected. Philip bought a new bicycle, our boy's dream, and I sewed a personalized superhero vest with the initials CP embroidered on the chest. It was an unforgettable party. More than 30 children attended. There were games organized by professional entertainers. We distributed elaborate party favors that I assembled myself. Charlie was radiant, running from one side to the other, receiving friends, proudly showing off the vest I had made. At the moment of singing Happy Birthday, with our son in the center, surrounded by friends and family, exchanging looks of pure happiness with Philip, I thought life couldn't get better than that. We had built something precious, something solid. A happy marriage, a wonderful son, a comfortable financial situation. The future seemed so promising, so full of possibilities. I couldn't imagine that in a few years everything we had built with so much love would begin to crumble. That the signs, small and subtle, that we sometimes noticed in Charlie's behavior, but preferred to ignore, were just the prelude to a devastating storm that was approaching. The following years passed in a pleasant routine. Charlie stood out more and more at school, always among the top of his class, participating in math Olympiads, science fairs, essay contests. By 12, he was already reading complex books, keeping a diary where he wrote surprisingly mature reflections, demonstrating multiple talents, from playing guitar, a 13th birthday present, to drawing with almost photographic precision. But we also noticed some peculiarities. He was an intense boy. When he was interested in something, he dove in headfirst, almost obsessively. He went through phases of fixation on dinosaurs, then astronomy, then quantum physics, subjects he studied with an unusual depth for his age. And he also had a solitary side. Despite being popular at school, he seemed to prefer his own company, spending hours in his room, reading, writing, drawing. "Is this normal?" I asked Philip one night, after realizing that Charlie had spent the entire Saturday locked in his room, working on a secret project he refused to show. "Other kids his age are always wanting to go out, play in the street." "Our son is special, Dorothy," Philip answered reassuringly. "He has a brilliant mind. It's natural that he's not interested in the same things as other boys." "Did you know Einstein was like this as a child?" I accepted that explanation because I wanted to believe it, because it was easier to see our son as a misunderstood genius than to admit there might be something wrong. And in fact, most of the time, Charlie was just an exceptionally intelligent and somewhat introspective teenager. He had friends, participated in school activities, talked with us about his interests, his plans for the future. In 1993, when he turned 15, Philip decided it was time to include him more actively in the family business. Not as an official employee, of course, he was still too young, but as an apprentice. During school vacations and some Saturdays, Charlie would accompany his father to the office, learning the rudiments of accounting, observing how a company was run. To our surprise and delight, he showed a natural aptitude for numbers, for organization, for the logic of balance sheets and statements. In a few weeks, he was already able to perform simple tasks without supervision: filing documents, entering data into spreadsheets, answering phone calls. Philip couldn't contain his pride. "He has a knack for business, Dorothy," he would comment, excited. "When he finishes college, he's going to revolutionize the company. I'm sure that under his leadership, frontier accounting will expand throughout the state. Those were good times. Charlie seemed to have found a purpose, something that channeled his intense mental energy productively. At home, we talked about the future. He would study accounting at college, perhaps in Seattle or even in New York, then return to gradually take over his father's business. Everything seemed on track, planned, promising, until 1995, shortly after Charlie's 17th birthday, when I noticed the first significant changes in his behavior. It started with small things. He, who had always been so organized, began to leave his room a mess. Clothes scattered, books stacked disorderly, notebooks open on the bed. His sleep, previously so regular, became erratic. Sometimes I would find him awake at 3 a.m, frantically writing in notebooks that he hid when I entered the room. "I'm just studying, Mom," he would explain, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I have an important test tomorrow." But it was school vacation, and there was no test. His appetite also changed. He, who always took pleasure in eating, especially the dishes I prepared with such care, now barely touched his food. He was visibly losing weight, his clothes starting to hang loose on his teenage body. "Are you eating properly, son?" I asked one night, concerned as I noticed he was just pushing the rice from one side of the plate to the other. "Are you sick?" "I'm not hungry," he answered dryly. "And stop treating me like a child, Mom. I know how to take care of myself." The sharpness was new too. Charlie had always been polite, respectful. Now he responded with impatience, was easily irritated, isolated himself more and more. Philip tried to talk to him, man to man, thinking it might just be normal teenage rebellion. "Son, your mother is worried. I am too. If something's bothering you, you can tell us. We're here to help." "There's nothing wrong with me," Charlie exploded, slamming the door to his room. "I just want to be left alone." We started receiving calls from the school. Charlie, the exemplary student, was skipping classes. When he did attend, he either seemed lethargic, unable to concentrate, or was too agitated, interrupting teachers with questions or comments out of context. His grades, always excellent, plummeted. "We're concerned," said the school counselor in a tense meeting. "Charles has always been one of our best students. This drastic change in behavior could indicate serious problems, perhaps drugs, perhaps depression. Have you noticed anything at home?" Of course we had noticed, but hearing it from the mouth of a professional in the formality of that room with framed diplomas on the walls made it terribly real. It wasn't just a phase. Something was really wrong with our son. We decided to take him to a doctor. It wasn't easy to convince him. He shouted, resisted, accused us of thinking he was crazy. But Philip was firm, for the first time using that authoritative tone he rarely needed to employ. "It's not a matter of choice, Charles. You're going to the doctor and that's final." The general practitioner ran a battery of tests, blood, urine, even a CT scan to rule out neurological problems. Everything normal. "Physically, your son is fine," he assured. "But I strongly recommend a psychological or psychiatric evaluation." The word psychiatric fell like a bomb on our family. Philip initially resisted. "My son isn't crazy, doctor." But I insisted. I had started to make connections I didn't want to make. The stories about my great-grandfather Nathaniel. Charlie's age, 17, precisely when they said my great-grandfather's problems in the head had begun to manifest. "It's just a consultation, Philip," I argued, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "If it's nothing, great. But if it's something that needs treatment, the sooner we find out, the better." Reluctantly, he agreed. I made an appointment with Dr. Morris, the only psychiatrist in town, an elderly gentleman with a reputation for competence, despite somewhat old-fashioned manners. Charlie refused to go. On the morning of the appointment, he locked himself in the bathroom and wouldn't come out with either pleas or threats. "You want to lock me up," he shouted through the door. "You want to get rid of me like they did with that crazy old man in the family." That chilled my spine. We had never told Charlie about my great-grandfather. How could he know? When we finally convinced him to come out of the bathroom, Philip threatened to break down the door. He was different. Too calm, almost serene, with a strange smile on his lips. "All right," he said docilely. "Let's go to the doctor. You're right, I'm not well." The sudden change in attitude should have alerted me, but I was so relieved that I didn't question it. On the way to the office, sitting in the back seat of the car, Charlie hummed softly a tune I didn't recognize. Looking in the rearview mirror, I noticed his eyes were glazed, fixed on some invisible point, and his lips were moving as if he were talking to someone. It was at that moment, watching my son through the car's rearview mirror on the way to the psychiatrist, that I saw for the first time what I feared most in my own son's eyes, the same empty gaze they said my great-grandfather had before he tried to strangle his sister. And I knew with devastating certainty that my family's nightmare had returned. The consultation with Dr. Morris was both revealing and terrifying. Initially, Charlie seemed cooperative, answering questions with apparent lucidity. But when the doctor began to explore his recent behavioral changes, something shifted. My son started speaking faster, jumping from one subject to another, using fancy words in sentences that barely made sense. "The numbers talk to me, doctor," he said, his eyes shining with a feverish intensity. "They have colors and textures. 7 is red and rough like sandpaper. 3 is blue and slippery like soap. The universe is coded in mathematical patterns that only I can see." Then, suddenly, he fell silent, staring fixedly at an empty corner of the room. When the doctor asked what he was thinking about, Charlie answered in a low voice, "He's here, the man in the hat. He's telling me you're not trustworthy." It was as if the floor had opened beneath my feet. Philip squeezed my hand so hard it hurt, but I barely felt it. My focus was entirely on our son, who now seemed to be animatedly conversing with the empty space. Dr. Morris's diagnosis was cautious, but direct. "Your son presents symptoms suggestive of a disorder in the schizophrenia spectrum. Auditory and visual hallucinations, delusions, disorganized thinking. The age is typical for the onset of manifestation, especially in males." "But he's always been so normal," Philip protested, his voice breaking. "So intelligent, so balanced." "Schizophrenia frequently affects brilliant people," the doctor explained, "and the first psychotic episodes are often preceded by a period of normal functioning. It's a treacherous disease precisely because of this. When we notice the signs, the process is often already advanced." We left that consultation with a prescription for medications and a recommendation to seek more specialized treatment in Seattle, where there were psychiatrists with more experience in cases like Charlie's. The drive home was silent, heavy. In the back seat, our son had returned to mutism, looking out the window with a vacant expression. That night, after putting Charlie to bed, he took the first pill without resistance, which surprised me. Philip and I sat on the porch, hands intertwined, trying to process the new reality that was unfolding. "Everything will be fine," Philip repeated, more to himself than to me. "We'll get the best treatment, the best doctors. Our son will overcome this." I wanted to believe him. God knows how much I wanted to. But something inside me knew that our life would never be the same again, that the golden years were behind us, and now we faced an obscure, uncertain, frightening journey. What we didn't know yet was how terrible this journey would be. We couldn't imagine that, in just a few months, we would lose not only our son's sanity, but also the pillar that held our family together. That fate had an even greater trial in store for us, when the violence that ran in my great-grandfather's blood would finally find its most brutal expression in the hands of my own son. But that, my dears, is a story for the next chapter of this painful saga that was my life. A story I need to tell, however difficult it may be, so that perhaps I can help other families facing the invisible monster of mental illness. Please leave your like on this video, I appreciate it very much. In the weeks following the diagnosis, we lived in a strange limbo. The medications Dr. Morris prescribed seemed to calm Charlie's most obvious symptoms. The hallucinations, the agitation, the disconnected speech. He started sleeping better, eating regularly, even returned to school after 2 weeks of rest at home. We came to believe, for a brief and blessed moment, that perhaps the doctor had exaggerated. Maybe it wasn't schizophrenia, just an isolated episode of stress, of mental exhaustion of a brilliant teenager under too much pressure. How we deceived ourselves. In March 1995, following Dr. Morris's recommendation, we traveled to Seattle for a consultation with a specialist, Dr. Henry Vasconcelos, a renowned psychiatrist with extensive experience in psychotic disorders. His clinic was in a modern building in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, so different from our doctor's antiquated office in Missoula. Polite receptionists, a waiting room with comfortable armchairs, updated magazines, a decorative water fountain that created a calming environment. Charlie, surprisingly, was cooperative that day. He dressed appropriately, maintained a lucid conversation during the 3-hour journey, even joked with his father about the chaotic traffic in the big city. When we arrived, he sat calmly in the waiting room, leafing through a scientific magazine with apparent interest. "I'm feeling much better," he assured us before entering the doctor's office. "I think these medications really work." Philip squeezed my hand, a flash of hope in his tired eyes. "See? Our boy is coming back." The consultation lasted almost 2 hours. Dr. Vasconcelos talked first with Charlie alone, then with us, and finally with all three together. His approach was different, less formal, warmer than Dr. Morris's, but equally meticulous. He took a detailed history, explored the family background. I shuddered when mentioning my great-grandfather Nathaniel, reviewed the medications, requested new tests. When the time finally came for the diagnosis, his face assumed a gentle but serious expression. "Charles presents a picture quite consistent with paranoid schizophrenia," he explained, using technical terms that mixed in my anxious mind. The reference delusions, the auditory hallucinations, the affective blunting interspersed with periods of lucidity, everything points to a disorder in the schizophrenic spectrum, probably with significant hereditary component. "But he seems so well today," Philip argued, his voice trembling with contained emotion. "Almost normal," the doctor nodded understandingly. "That's a common characteristic of the disease, especially in the early stages. There are fluctuations, periods of apparent normality followed by relapses. The medications help control the symptoms, but they don't cure the condition." "Will he be able to lead a normal life?" I asked, the question that had tormented me most since the nightmare began. "Study, work, have his own family someday? With proper treatment, many patients achieve a satisfactory quality of life," the doctor replied, choosing his words carefully. "But I must be honest, Charles will face significant challenges. Schizophrenia is a chronic condition that will require ongoing medical monitoring, regular medication, possibly lifestyle adaptation." We left that consultation with a new prescription, more modern medications, adjusted dosages, and referrals for complementary therapies, psychotherapy, occupational therapy, support groups for the family. Dr. Vasconcelos suggested we consider the possibility of Charlie undergoing treatment in Seattle, where there would be more specialized resources. "Think carefully," he advised. "It's an important decision. Moving to a new city can be stressful, but the benefits of access to a specialized multidisciplinary team may outweigh the inconveniences." On the way back to Missoula, we discussed the options. Moving to Seattle would mean leaving our home, Philip's business, my small network of cake clients, our entire social circle. But staying would mean relying only on Dr. Morris, already elderly, with outdated knowledge about the most recent treatments. Charlie, sitting in the back seat, remained strangely silent. When I asked what he thought about the idea of us moving to the big city, he just shrugged. "It doesn't matter," he replied, looking out the window. "The man in the hat will come with me anyway." A chill ran down my spine. The man in the hat, his most frequent hallucination, hadn't been mentioned for days. I thought it had disappeared with the medication. I exchanged a worried look with Philip, who gripped the steering wheel so hard his knuckles turned white. We decided to wait. Give the new medications a chance, see how Charlie would respond in the coming weeks before making such a drastic decision as moving to a new city. Philip talked with George, his partner, about the possibility of temporarily reducing his workload to be more present at home. I reorganized my order schedule, prioritizing only the oldest and most profitable clients to have more time to care for our son. For a few weeks, it seemed we had made the right decision. Charlie returned to school full-time, resumed some of his normal activities. The new medications had side effects. He complained of dry mouth, daytime drowsiness, mild tremors in his hands. But they seemed to control the psychotic symptoms. The weekly consultations with Dr. Morris were calm, routine. It was in May, almost 2 months after the consultation in Seattle, that things began to crumble again. It all started when I found the pills, dozens of them, hidden inside a hollow book on the shelf in Charlie's room. He hadn't been taking his medication for weeks, perhaps since we returned from the city. I confronted him, of course. First calmly, trying to understand. "Son, why did you hide the pills? You know you need them to stay well." He looked at me with a coldness I didn't recognize. "They make me slow, heavy. I can't think straight when I take them. But the delusions come back without them, Charlie. The voices, the hallucinations." A strange smile formed on his lips. "And who said they're delusions, Mom? What if I really can see things you can't? What if the man in the hat is real, just invisible to ordinary minds?" The conversation quickly deteriorated from there. Charlie became agitated, started pacing back and forth across the room, gesturing to the air as if talking to someone only he could see. When I tried to hold him, calm him down, he pushed me with surprising strength, making me fall sitting on the bed. "Don't touch me," he shouted, eyes wide with fear and anger. "He says you want to poison me, that the pills are poison." Philip arrived home from work in the middle of this chaos. I had never seen him so frightened as in that moment, standing in the doorway, watching our 17-year-old son in full psychotic episode, shouting delusional accusations against us. We called Dr. Morris, who came immediately to our house. For the first time, he mentioned the possibility of hospitalization. If he's not taking the medication voluntarily and is showing aggressive behavior and intense persecutory delusions, a period of stabilization in a hospital environment may be necessary, the doctor explained. While in the next room, Charlie continued talking to himself, now in a lower, conspiratorial voice. The idea of hospitalizing our son broke our hearts. We imagined psychiatric hospitals as dark, inhumane places, full of sedated patients and brutal treatments. But Dr. Morris assured us that things had changed a lot in recent decades. "The Western State Hospital in Seattle has an excellent youth ward," he explained. "The treatment is humanized, focused on stabilization and reintegration. We're not talking about a prolonged hospitalization, just the time needed to adjust the medication and ensure that Charles takes it regularly." Reluctantly, we agreed to consider the option. But before we could make any decision, Charlie suddenly seemed to improve. The next morning, he came down for breakfast calm, almost serene. He apologized for his behavior the previous night, promised to start taking his medications regularly again, said he had had a moment of confusion, but now was more lucid. "It was just a lapse, Mom," he explained, obediently taking the pill I placed beside his glass of juice. "It won't happen again." I wanted so much to believe him, and for a few days, I really did. I personally supervised each dose of medication, verifying that he actually swallowed it, not hiding it under his tongue as I later discovered he had been doing. Charlie returned to his routine, school, home, sometimes a trip to his father's office on weekends. He seemed stable, almost normal. It was precisely when we lowered our guard that the worst happened. On a Friday in June, Charlie didn't return from school at the usual time. By 5 in the afternoon, I started to worry. By 6, I was in panic. I called all his friends I knew, the school, even the small-town police station. No one had news of him. Philip went out to look for him, going through the places our son used to frequent: the central square, the town library, the football field on the outskirts of town. Nothing. When he returned, around 9 at night, his face was pale, his eyes red as if holding back tears by force. "Let's go to the police," he decided. "This isn't normal. Something happened." We were preparing to leave when we heard the sound of keys in the door. Charlie entered, his hair disheveled, clothes dirty and wrinkled, a strong smell of alcohol emanating from him. "Where were you?" Philip practically shouted, a mix of relief and fury in his voice. "We were going crazy with worry." Charlie smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I went to meet some friends in Spokane, people who really understand me." Spokane was the neighboring city, about an hour-and-a-half drive from Missoula. The two cities had good connections by highway, and many people commuted between them for work or leisure. "What friends?" I insisted, noticing his eyes were dilated, not just from alcohol. "What did you take, Charlie?" He laughed, a bitter, almost adult sound. "What makes me feel good, Mom? What drives away the voices better than those pills you force me to swallow?" Philip stepped forward, grabbing his son's arm. "Did you use drugs? Answer me!" What happened next was so fast, I barely had time to process it. Charlie wrenched himself free with a sudden movement and then delivered a punch to his father's face. Philip staggered backward, more surprised than hurt, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "Don't touch me!" Charlie shouted, his eyes wide, wild. "None of you touch me. You're not my parents. My real parents were replaced." It was the classic Capgras delusion. I learned the name later in my desperate readings about the disease. The conviction that close people, usually family members, have been replaced by identical imposters. A common symptom in certain types of paranoid schizophrenia. That night was a nightmare. Charlie alternated between periods of intense aggression, breaking objects, threatening us, and moments of pure fear, huddled in a corner, begging the imposters not to hurt him. We called Dr. Morris, who came accompanied by 2 nurses from the small-town hospital. Physical force was necessary to restrain our son and administer a sedative. "We have no choice," the doctor said, watching Charlie finally fall asleep on the living room sofa, surrounded by the debris of objects he had broken in his fury. "He needs immediate hospitalization." The next day, a cloudy Saturday that seemed to reflect the darkness in our hearts, we made the most difficult journey of our lives. Charlie, still under the effect of sedatives, barely realized what was happening. We installed him in the back seat of the car, covered with a blanket, and began the long drive to Seattle. The admission process at Western State Hospital was surprisingly efficient, but emotionally devastating. We filled out forms, signed authorizations, talked with doctors, social workers, psychologists. We repeatedly explained the history, the first symptoms, the diagnosis, the refusal to take medication, the violent episode the night before. When the time came to say goodbye, Charlie was already more awake, beginning to understand what was happening. The panic in his eyes when he realized he would be left there, among strangers, in an unknown place, almost broke my determination. "Mom, don't do this," he begged, clutching my hand tightly. For a moment, he was my boy again, not the disturbed young man from the night before. "Don't leave me here. I promise I'll behave. I'll take the pills. I'll do everything right." Philip, beside me, swallowed hard, tears flowing freely down his face marked by the night of terror. "It's for your own good, son, just until you get better." "I am better already," Charlie insisted, looking frantically around at the white, sterile walls of the admission room. "Please, Dad, Mom, don't abandon me here." It took all my strength to let go of his hand, to take a step back when the nurses approached to take him away. The scream he let out, an animal sound, pure suffering, still echoes in my nightmares. "You'll pay for this," he shouted as he was led down the hallway. It was no longer my son's voice, but something distorted by anger and disease. "You're not my parents. My parents would never throw me in a madhouse." In the car, returning home without our son, the silence between Philip and me was dense, almost suffocating. Words seemed inadequate in the face of the magnitude of the pain we felt. He drove mechanically, his eyes fixed on the road, occasionally raising his hand to wipe away a stubborn tear. "We did the right thing," he finally murmured, when we were already halfway home. "We had no choice." "I know," I replied, though a part of me wasn't so sure. "But why does doing the right thing hurt so much?" The days that followed were strange, ghostly. The house, once so alive with Charlie's presence, even in his most difficult days, now seemed like a mausoleum. His untouched room, the empty chair at the dinner table, the silence in the mornings, where before we heard his hurried steps getting ready for school. We called the hospital daily, anxious for news. In the first days, the information was minimal. "He's adapting," they said. "An adjustment period is normal." In the first week, we couldn't visit him, part of the protocol for patients in acute crisis, they explained. Finally, after 10 days that seemed like an eternity, we were authorized to visit our son. We made that 3-hour drive to Seattle again, our hearts heavy with hope and fear. The hospital wasn't the dark place I feared. The youth ward, in particular, was surprisingly welcoming. Walls painted in light colors, A common room with games and books, simple but clean rooms shared by a maximum of 2 patients. Charlie shared his room with a younger boy, apparently with some kind of mood disorder. When he saw us in the visiting room, Charlie didn't show the joy we secretly hoped for. He was calm, almost apathetic, an effect of the medication, the nurse later explained. We talked for almost an hour about trivial and superficial matters. He asked about the house, about the neighbors, about Philip's work. He avoided mentioning his condition, the treatment, when he could return home. Only when we were preparing to leave did he finally look us in the eyes. A clear, lucid look, the look of our Charlie from before. "I'm sorry for what I did," he said, his voice low. It wasn't me that night." Philip hugged him, sobbing without shame. "We know that, son. No one blames you. We just want you to get well." "I will," he promised, returning the hug with an intensity that surprised me. "The doctors here are good. I'm taking the medications." The voices are lower, more distant. We returned home lighter, with renewed hope. Perhaps, after all, the hospitalization had been the right decision. Perhaps our son was on the path to recovery. The following weeks followed a pattern. We visited Charlie every Saturday, always noticing small improvements. His expression more lively, his conversation more coherent, his interest gradually returning to subjects that used to fascinate him. Books, science, his father's business. The doctors talked about significant progress, successful medication adjustment, positive prospects for discharge soon. In July, almost a month after the hospitalization, we had a meeting with the complete medical team: psychiatrist, psychologist, social worker, occupational therapist. Everyone agreed that Charlie was responding exceptionally well to the treatment. We discussed the next steps: hospital discharge, outpatient follow-up, the possibility of him returning to school in the second semester. "It's important to establish a structured routine, but without excessive pressure," the psychiatrist recommended. "The return to normal activities should be gradual, monitored." We decided that Philip would temporarily rent a small apartment in Seattle. I would move there with Charlie, so he could continue outpatient treatment in the city while readapting to life outside the hospital. Philip would divide his time between Missoula, where the accounting office required his presence, and Seattle, coming on weekends and holidays. "It's not ideal, but it's temporary," Philip assured, though I could see the concern in his eyes. Not just for the separation, but for the finances, renting a property in the big city, maintaining 2 homes, the frequent travels. All this would represent a considerable weight on our budget. "The important thing is that our son has the best possible treatment." At the end of July, Charlie was discharged. He left the hospital different, thinner, with a more serious look, more adult than his 17 years suggested, but also more stable, more present, more aware of his condition and the need to take care of it. "I won't stop taking the medications again," he promised as we loaded his few belongings into the car. "I learned the hard way what happens when I do that." Our rented apartment was in the Capitol Hill neighborhood, not as elegant as the area where Dr. Vasconcelos had his clinic, but still a pleasant area with easy access to the hospital for follow-up appointments. It was small, 2 bedrooms, combined living room and kitchen, 1 bathroom, but cozy in its own way. I furnished it with the essentials, trying to create a welcoming environment with the limited resources we had. Philip stayed with us the first weekend, helping to organize everything, making sure we were comfortable and safe. When he left, on Sunday night, I felt a tightness in my heart that had nothing to do with the normal longing of a temporarily separated couple. It was a premonition, a vague but persistent fear that something was wrong, that our apparent victory against the disease was fragile, temporary. "Everything will be fine," Philip assured, hugging me tightly before getting into the car for the long drive back. "We're on the right path now." The first weeks in Seattle were surprisingly calm. Charlie followed the treatment rigorously: therapy 3 times a week, psychiatric consultation fortnightly, medication at exact times. He started attending a support group for young people with mental disorders, where for the first time he could talk with people who really understood what he was going through. I enrolled him in a prep course for the college entrance exam. Less demanding than regular school, but still stimulating for his mind, hungry for knowledge. On good days, he reminded me of the Charlie from before, curious, articulate, full of plans for the future. "I still want to go to college," he told me one night, as we dined at the small kitchen table. "Maybe not accounting like Dad wanted. I'm thinking about psychology, you know? To better understand what happens in here." He pointed to his own head, an ironic smile on his lips. There were bad days too, of course. Days when the medication seemed too heavy, leaving him lethargic, distant. Days when the side effects, tremors, dry mouth, dizziness, left him frustrated, irritated. Days when the voices, though weaker, still made themselves heard, whispering doubts, feeding fears. "The man in the hat still appears sometimes," he admitted during a joint session with his therapist. "Not as clear as before, more like a shadow in the corner of the eye. And I don't believe what he says anymore. I know he's not real, but he's still there." Philip came every weekend, as promised. He would arrive on Friday night, exhausted from the trip and the intense work week, but always with a smile, always with gifts. A new book for Charlie, flowers for me, typical treats from Montana that we knew we wouldn't find in the big city. We spent those 2 precious days as a normal family. We went to the movies, walked in the park, visited the public market. Charlie seemed especially animated on these occasions, as if his father's presence completed a circuit, restored a vital energy that was missing on weekdays. When September came, completing 2 months of this arrangement, we began to discuss the possibility of returning to Missoula. Dr. Vasconcelos was cautiously optimistic. "Charles is evolving well," he acknowledged during a consultation where Philip was also present. "But I still recommend a few more months of intensive follow-up here in the city before considering returning to your hometown. His stability is still relatively recent." Philip sighed, the exhaustion evident on his face. The weekly trips, the dual responsibility, taking care of the office in Montana, supporting the family in Seattle, were taking their toll. "Let's follow the medical recommendation," he agreed, always prioritizing his son's well-being above any personal convenience. "But I need to find a more sustainable solution for the office. I can't continue to be absent 4 days a week indefinitely." The solution came in the form of an unexpected proposal. George, Philip's partner, suggested opening a branch of Frontier Accounting in Seattle. He would be responsible for the main office in Missoula, while Philip would develop the new operation in the city, allowing the family to finally reunite permanently. "It's risky, financially speaking," Philip admitted when we discussed the idea. "Opening a branch in a big city with fierce competition, but it might be our best chance to stay together without compromising Charlie's treatment." The decision was made. In the following months, while Charlie continued his treatment, Philip immersed himself in the new branch project, looking for a suitable commercial location, dealing with bureaucracy, starting to build a client portfolio from scratch. It was a period of intense work for him, of adaptation for all of us. October arrived with a sense of new beginning. The rented apartment was replaced by a larger one, more suitable for a permanent residence. We bought new furniture, decorated the spaces with objects brought from our home in Montana, trying to create a home that blended familiar comfort with the freshness of a new start. Charlie seemed to flourish in this new arrangement. His father's constant presence, the stability of an established routine, the continuity of treatment, everything contributed to his steady progress. He began to talk about concrete plans for next year's college entrance exams, about possible universities, about careers that interested him. In November, on the eve of his 18th birthday, we had one of the most significant conversations since the onset of his illness. We were in the living room after dinner, just the 2 of us. Philip had gone to the office to resolve an emergency with a client. "Mom," he began hesitantly, his eyes fixed on the turned-off television in front of us. "Do you think I'll always be like this? Always sick?" The question caught me by surprise, although I knew he certainly had been carrying it inside himself for a long time. I took a deep breath, seeking the most honest and loving answer I could give. "I think you'll always need care, son. Medication, follow-up. Schizophrenia has no cure, at least not yet. But that doesn't mean you can't have a full, happy, productive life. How can I be happy knowing that at any moment I might lose control? That the voices might come back stronger? That I might hurt people I love, like I almost did to Dad?" There was so much anguish in that question that my heart tightened. I took his hands in mine, noticing how cold they were despite the warmth of the night. "You are not your disease, Charlie. You're much more than that. You're intelligent, sensitive, talented. You're aware of your condition, you're getting treatment, you're learning to recognize the warning signs. That's already half the battle. He nodded slowly, absorbing my words. Sometimes I'm afraid I'll never be able to have a normal life. A girlfriend, children, a career. Many people with schizophrenia have all that, son. It won't be easy. It won't be as you imagined when you were younger. But it's possible. And your father and I will be by your side every step of the way. A sad smile touched his lips. You've been incredible. After everything I did, how I acted, you're still here, rebuilding your lives because of me. Because we love you more than anything in the world. It's always been that way. Ever since you were just a promise in my belly. It always will be. That night, lying in bed waiting for Philip to return, I reflected on our journey so far. The devastating diagnosis, the painful hospitalization, the move to Seattle, the gradual rebuilding of our lives around the new reality. It had been the hardest year of our lives, no doubt, but also a year of discoveries, of strengthening bonds, of a deeper understanding of what really mattered. I fell asleep with a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in a long time. A fragile peace, perhaps, built on foundations still unstable. But peace, nonetheless. I didn't imagine it would be the last peaceful night I would have for a very, very long time. That fate, still not satisfied with the trials it had imposed on us, was preparing its cruelest, most merciless blow. A blow that would not only destroy the fragile stability we had achieved, but would also irreparably tear from me, the man who had been my safe harbor for more than 20 years. That November night in 1995 started like so many others. Philip called to say he would be a little late at the office. An important client from Montana was having serious problems with his tax return and needed urgent help. "Don't wait up," he said, his voice tired on the phone. "It might take a while." I had dinner with Charlie. We watched a program on TV, talked about plans for his 18th birthday that was approaching. Around 10, he took his evening medication and went to bed. I stayed a little longer in the living room, knitting a sweater that would be Philip's Christmas present, trying not to look at the clock every 5 minutes. 11 o'clock, midnight, 1 in the morning. Fatigue finally overcame me. I left a note on the kitchen table. "There's food in the oven. I love you." And went to sleep, imagining I would find Philip beside me when I woke up, as so many other times when he came home late at night. The phone rang at 4:27 in the morning. I know the exact time because I looked at the digital clock on the nightstand, those red numbers glowing in the darkness of the room. 4:27. The hour when my life changed forever. It was George, Philip's partner, calling from Missoula. His voice trembled so much I could barely understand the first sentences. Something about an accident, a bar fight, the police trying to make contact. "Calm down, George," I asked, sitting up in bed, my heart already racing with a terrible premonition. "What are you talking about? What accident?" "Philip, Dorothy, he's dead." The words hit me like a physical punch, stealing my breath, making the room spin around me. It couldn't be true. Philip was in Seattle, working at the office. George must be confused. Drunk, perhaps, or it was some kind of sick joke. "That doesn't make sense," I replied, my voice firmer than I expected. "Philip is here in Seattle. He stayed late at the office yesterday." A heavy silence on the other end of the line. Then George's voice, now broken by sobs. "He was here, Dorothy. He arrived yesterday afternoon to resolve the situation with Alan Mendoza, that vineyard client. He said he would return to Seattle this morning." My mind refused to process the information. Philip hadn't mentioned any trip to Missoula. Why would he hide this from me? Unless, "What happened, George?" I asked, a chill running down my spine. "Tell me exactly what happened." Gradually, between painful pauses and confused explanations, the story emerged. Philip had gone to Missoula that day without telling me to personally resolve the situation with the client. Work completed, he went to Joe's Bar, a simple but respectable establishment in the central area of town, to meet some friends before spending the night in our old house, which we still kept. Joe's Bar was dangerously close to the rougher part of town, where drug deals and other criminal activities were common. That night, a group of those criminals, the Iron Wolves, a gang known for drug trafficking and protection rackets, was at the bar. There were about 8 men, already drunk, making a ruckus, bothering the other customers. Philip, always diplomatic, tried to defuse the situation when one of the men began to harass the waitress. "Leave the girl alone," he reportedly said, placing himself between the thug and the young woman. "She's just doing her job." Simple, civilized words. Words that cost him his life. The man didn't like the intervention. He pulled out a knife, a large hunting knife, and without warning, stabbed Philip in the abdomen. A single thrust, deep, precise. The attacker's friends immediately dragged him out, fleeing in a truck before anyone could stop them. Philip was rushed to the small county hospital, but the hemorrhage was too extensive. He died on the operating table, without a chance for goodbyes, without a chance to fight. At 3:48 in the morning, they officially declared his death. When I hung up the phone, I remained motionless on the bed, unable to cry, to scream, to do anything. A strange numbness took over my body, as if I were watching everything from very far away, as if it were someone else receiving the news that her husband of 20 years had been murdered in a bar fight. I don't know how long I stayed like that, paralyzed. Perhaps minutes, perhaps hours. The sky was beginning to lighten when I finally managed to move. My first conscious thought was about Charlie. How to tell our son, already so fragile from the disease, that his father had been brutally murdered. How to protect him from a blow that would certainly threaten all the progress he had made in recent months. I decided to wait until he woke up naturally. There was no rush. Nothing would change the fact that Philip was dead. And I needed those few hours to minimally process what had happened, to find strength to be the pillar my son would need. I took a hot shower, finally letting the tears come, mixing with the water that ran down. I dressed mechanically, prepared coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and waited. Charlie appeared around 8, his hair tousled from sleep, his eyes still a little cloudy from the previous night's medication. He smiled when he saw me, a sleepy, innocent smile. "Good morning, Mom." "Where's Dad?" The question was so normal, so routine, that for an insane second I thought about lying, saying that Philip had left early, that he would be back soon, postpone for a few hours the inevitable pain that would come. But I looked into my son's eyes, the same honey-colored eyes as Philip's, and knew I couldn't do that. "Son," I began, my voice trembling despite all my efforts to keep it steady. "Something terrible happened. Your father went to Missoula yesterday to resolve a problem with a client. And there, the words refused to come out. How to say that the man he most admired in the world, his hero, his safe harbor, had been stabbed to death in a bar. How to transform something so brutal, so senseless, into words. "He died, didn't he?" Charlie asked, his voice strangely calm. The man in the hat told me this would happen. A chill ran down my spine. The man in the hat. Charlie's most persistent hallucination, which we thought was under control with medication. Had it returned? Or was it just a macabre coincidence? "Yes, son," I confirmed, reaching for his hands across the table. "There was a fight in a bar. He tried to defend a girl who was being harassed, and a man attacked him with a knife. He didn't survive. I expected tears, screams, denial, any of the normal reactions to grief. Instead, I saw something that frightened me much more. A detachment, a disconnection, as if a curtain had descended over Charlie's eyes, separating him from reality. "He warned me," my son repeated, his gaze fixed on some point beyond my shoulder. "The man in the hat said Dad would leave us, that it would be just the two of us, that it was better this way." "Charlie," I called, squeezing his hands, trying to bring him back. "This isn't real. Your father didn't leave us by choice. It was a terrible accident, a tragedy. No one could have predicted it. But he wasn't listening to me anymore. He had risen abruptly, went to the window, and began to mutter to himself or to someone only he could see. The crisis I had feared so much was beginning, triggered by the shock of losing his father. I immediately called Dr. Vasconcelos, explaining the situation in hurried, broken words, interspersed with fear. He understood the gravity of the moment and promised to come to our apartment as quickly as possible. "Meanwhile," he instructed, "give him an extra dose of the emergency medication. Keep him calm, don't confront him, don't deny what he's seeing or hearing. Just be present." The following hours were a blur of phone calls, impossible decisions, and practical arrangements. Philip's body needed to be transported from Missoula to Seattle. The funeral needed to be organized. Family needed to be informed. And above all, Charlie needed to be stabilized. Dr. Vasconcelos arrived around 10 in the morning, accompanied by a psychiatric nurse. They found Charlie in the midst of a psychotic episode, animatedly conversing with his father, who, in his mind, was sitting on the living room couch, telling him about how his death had been just a setup to fool them, the invisible persecutors that populated his delusions. He's in complete dissociation, the doctor explained after evaluating my son. His mind is protecting itself from the unbearable pain by creating an alternative reality where his father is still alive. What do we do? I asked, exhausted, devastated, fearing the answer I already anticipated. He needs immediate hospitalization. It's not safe to keep him at home in this state. He could harm himself or others. And so, on the same day I lost my husband, I had to hospitalize my son again. This time not at Western State Hospital, but at a private clinic, more modern, with more advanced treatments, paid for by the life insurance policy that Philip, always prudent, had taken out years before. The days that followed were the darkest of my existence. Philip's funeral took place in a state of torpor, as if I were observing everything from outside my own body. People I barely knew shaking my hand, offering condolences, murmuring phrases of comfort that didn't register in my mind. The absence of Charlie, sedated in a psychiatric clinic, unaware of his father's final farewell, was an additional pain, as if the family had been torn from me in layers, one loss on top of another. The burial took place in Seattle, not in Missoula. I couldn't bear the thought of leaving Philip in that town that had taken him from me. Besides, our life was now in the city. As painful as it was to admit, we had no plans to return to Montana. George, Philip's partner, was extraordinary during that period. He took care of all the paperwork, the legal procedures, the issues related to the company. He made sure I had immediate access to Philip's part in Frontier Accounting, that the insurance was processed without complications, that no material concerns were added to the crushing weight of grief I already carried. A week after the funeral, when the house finally emptied of well-meaning relatives and concerned friends, I sat alone on the balcony of our apartment, watching the sunset over Seattle. It was a spectacular twilight, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink that Philip would have loved to photograph. The beauty of the moment cruelly contrasted with the emptiness inside me. It was there, on that balcony, that I finally allowed the complete reality of my situation to hit me. I was alone. My husband, my life companion, had been brutally murdered. My only son was hospitalized with a severe psychotic episode, his condition potentially permanently worsened by the trauma. Our carefully rebuilt life in Seattle had been shattered in a matter of hours. I cried until there were no more tears, until my body physically ached with the effort of sobbing. I cried for Philip, for the life we built together, for the dreams we would never realize. I cried for Charlie, for the uncertain future that awaited him, for the constant battle against the demons in his mind. I cried for myself, for the woman I was and would never be again. When the sun finally disappeared on the horizon, I stood up, wiped my face, and made a decision. I would not allow myself to collapse. Not now. Not when my son needed my strength more than ever. Philip was gone. But Charlie was still here, fighting, and I would fight alongside him until my last breath. The following months were an arduous journey of readaptation. Charlie remained hospitalized for 6 weeks, receiving intensive treatment with new medications, daily therapies, innovative approaches to control the delusions that now included frequent conversations with his deceased father. I visited him every day, spending hours by his side, even when he barely noticed my presence, lost in his inner world. I would read to him books he loved in childhood, news from the paper, letters from old school friends. I talked about Philip, about the memories we shared, gradually trying to help him accept the reality of the loss. Meanwhile, I dealt with practical issues I never imagined facing alone. What to do with Frontier Accounting? I had no training in the field. I couldn't operationally take over Philip's part in the business. George offered to buy my share, ensuring a fair value and monthly payments that would give me financial stability for a few years. And what about the house in Missoula? Keeping it would mean a painful connection to the place where Philip was killed. Selling it would mean cutting the last physical tie with the town where we built our family, where we lived so many happy moments. Decisions, 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 all weighing exclusively on my shoulders, without Philip to discuss, ponder, advise, without even Charlie lucid enough to offer an opinion. It was during this period that I discovered an inner strength I didn't know I possessed. I learned to trust my own judgment, to make difficult decisions, and live with their consequences. I sold the house in Montana. I accepted George's offer for Philip's part in the office. I reorganized our finances to ensure that, whatever happened, Charlie would always have resources for his treatment. In January 1996, 2 months after Philip's death, Charlie finally was discharged from the clinic. He was more stable. The delusions controlled by the new medication, the reality of his father's death, gradually accepted, at least at a conscious level. But he was a different young man who returned home. Quieter, more withdrawn, with a distant look that rarely lit up. The doctors explained that this was to be expected, a combination of the effects of the stronger medication, the natural process of grief, and the evolution of schizophrenia itself. He may never return to being exactly as he was before, warned Dr. Vasconcelos in one of our consultations. The important thing now is stability, security, routine. And that's what I tried to provide. I transformed our apartment into a sanctuary of calm and predictability. Regular times for meals, medication, therapy, a tranquil environment without excessive stimuli that could trigger crises. A constant, attentive, but not suffocating presence. Charlie had just turned 18, legally an adult, but emotionally more vulnerable than a child. The dream of college was temporarily shelved. Instead, he began attending a psychosocial rehabilitation center 3 times a week, where he participated in therapeutic workshops, support groups, recreational activities with other young people in similar situations. The routine worked for a while. There were even moments of hope, sparks of the old Charlie emerging occasionally. A perceptive comment about a book he was reading, an unexpected joke during dinner, a renewed interest in drawing, an activity he had always loved in childhood. But the stability was fragile, built on shaky foundations. Just one trigger, a photo of Philip he unexpectedly found, a song that played on the radio and reminded him of his father, the casual mention of Missoula in some conversation, was enough for anxiety to increase, for the gaze to become distant again, for the lips to begin moving in silent conversations with invisible interlocutors. Initially, these relapses were brief, controllable with emergency medication, with breathing techniques he had learned in therapy, with my reassuring presence by his side. But gradually, they became more frequent, more intense, more difficult to reverse. In March, a particularly frightening incident. I woke up in the middle of the night with Charlie standing beside my bed, a pocket knife in his hand, glazed eyes fixed on me. He told me I need to check, he murmured, his voice distant, mechanical. Check if you're real or an imposter. I managed to calm him down, get him to give me the knife, take him back to his room and administer the emergency medication. But something broke inside me that night. The cruel reality of our situation became impossible to ignore. My son, in his moments of crisis, represented a real danger, to himself and potentially to me. The next morning, I called Dr. Vasconcelos. The conversation was long, painful, filled with tears on my part and thoughtful silences on his. In the end, the conclusion was inevitable. Charlie needed a level of supervision and care that I, alone, could no longer provide. There are options, the doctor assured, his voice gentle but firm. We're not talking about an old-fashioned asylum, Mrs. Williams. There are modern, humanized therapeutic residences where he would have 24-hour monitoring, structured activities, interaction with other patients, regular visits from you. Like a nursing home, I replied bitterly, guilt already gnawing at my heart. I'm abandoning my son. No, not at all, he insisted. You're doing what's best for him, ensuring he receives the care he needs. It's an act of love, not abandonment. I wanted to believe him. I needed to believe him. But in the weeks that followed, as I visited institutions, spoke with professionals, filled out forms, the feeling of betraying Charlie, of failing as a mother, didn't leave me. How to explain to an 18-year-old already fragile from the loss of his father that he could no longer live with his mother. How to make him understand that it wasn't rejection, it wasn't abandonment, but the only way to ensure his safety and well-being. The conversation I dreaded finally happened in April, on a sunny afternoon. Charlie was having a good day, lucid, present, even helped prepare lunch. I sat with him on the balcony, his hands between mine, and explained in the most loving way possible what was to come. To my surprise, there was no resistance, no accusations. Just a nod of understanding, a resigned sigh, and then a question that broke my heart. "It's because of that night with the knife, isn't it? You're afraid of me." "I'm not afraid of you, son," I answered, tears already blurring my vision. "I'm afraid for your safety. When the voices get too strong, you could seriously hurt yourself. I wouldn't forgive myself if something happened to you under my care." He nodded slowly, his gaze losing itself on the horizon. "The man in the hat says it's better this way, that I need to stay away from you, that I'm a danger." Those words hit me like a stab. The disease was robbing not only my son's mind, but also his right to be unconditionally loved, to feel deserving of care, of closeness, of normalcy. "The man in the hat is wrong," I said firmly, holding his face between my hands, forcing him to look into my eyes. "You're not a danger. You're my son, my heart outside my chest. That will never change. And I'm not sending you away. I'll be with you every day, visiting, participating in your treatment. We'll just be sleeping in different places." I don't know if he really believed me. How could he? But he accepted it, with a resignation that suggested that perhaps, at some level, he understood the need for the change. In May 1996, 6 months after Philip's death, Charlie moved to the New Horizons Therapeutic Residence, a relatively new institution on the outskirts of Seattle. It was a pleasant place, at least outwardly. A large house, airy, with well-kept gardens, individual rooms for residents, welcoming common spaces, a team of professionals who seemed genuinely committed to the patient's well-being. On moving day, I helped him arrange his room. I put photos of us on the walls, arranged his favorite books on the small bookshelf, made the bed with sheets from home so he would have something familiar in the new environment. When the time came to say goodbye, he hugged me with surprising intensity. "Everything will be okay, Mom," he whispered, strangely reversing our roles, as if it were he who needed to comfort me. I understand why it has to be this way. Driving back to the empty apartment that night, I let the tears flow freely. In less than a year, I had lost my husband to violence, and now, in a way, I had also lost my son to the cruel disease that devoured his mind. The house that should shelter our family was reduced to a silent space where only I lived, surrounded by photos and memories of a life that seemed to belong to someone else, in another time. In the months that followed, I established a new routine. I visited Charlie daily, participated in the family meetings offered by the institution, talked regularly with his doctors and therapists. On good days, I would take him for short outings, a walk in the nearby park, coffee at a bakery, occasionally even lunch at the apartment on weekends. He seemed to adapt reasonably well. The adjusted medication, the structured routine, the consistency of professional monitoring, everything contributed to a stability we could no longer achieve at home. There were episodes, of course, days when I would find him more confused, more distant, talking with his deceased father or with the persistent man in the hat. But they were quickly managed by the staff without escalating into serious crises like those I had witnessed at home. "He's progressing," the doctors assured. Slowly, but progressing, and I wanted to believe it. I needed to believe it. To fill the empty days, the deafening silences of the apartment, I went back to work. Not with the sweets that were my joy in Missoula. I had lost the taste for creating sweet things when life became so bitter. Instead, I accepted a job as a receptionist at a medical clinic near home. The work was simple, but it filled the hours, provided some human interaction, and most importantly, it was only 15 minutes from the therapeutic residence, allowing me to visit Charlie during my lunch hour or immediately after my shift. I felt like a plant that had its roots torn out and now was desperately trying to establish new shoots in arid soil. Each small routine, Each new acquaintance, each established habit was an attempt to create some kind of structure, of meaning, in a world that had lost its fundamental coordinates. The first anniversary of Philip's death came like a storm in a sky that was beginning to clear. November 1996, 1 year since I lost my life companion, my safe harbor. The pain, which had become a constant but manageable hum in the background of my consciousness, returned with full force that day. I spent the morning at the cemetery, sitting beside the simple but elegant grave, talking in a low voice to the man who still visited my dreams every night. I told him about Charlie, about the therapeutic residence, about my new job, about the overwhelming loneliness I felt even surrounded by people, about the constant fear of the future. "How will I go on without you, Philip?" I murmured, running my fingers over the letters engraved on the headstone. "How will I take care of our son alone?" I didn't expect an answer, of course. But in that sacred silence of the cemetery, under the gray sky of a melancholy November, I felt something calm down inside me. Not a resignation, not a complete acceptance. I would never completely accept what happened, the senseless brutality that robbed Philip from us. But perhaps a recognition that, despite everything, I was surviving. One day after another, one breath after another, I was still here. And as long as I was here, Charlie would have someone fighting for him, believing in him, loving him unconditionally. I visited him that afternoon, as I did every day. To my surprise, he seemed especially lucid, as if he too felt the weight of the date. "It's been a year today, hasn't it?" he asked when we sat in the residence's garden. "Since Dad left." I nodded, unable to trust my voice at that moment. "I miss him," Charlie continued, his eyes fixed on the flowers swaying gently in the breeze. "Not the Dad I see sometimes in my episodes, but the real Dad. The one who played ball with me in the backyard, who taught me math, who never gave up on me even when I started getting sick." The tears I had held back at the cemetery finally came, silent, running down my cheeks. It was the first time in months that Charlie spoke with such clarity about Philip, distinguishing between the real father and the figure that appeared in his delusions. "I think he would be proud of you," I finally managed to say, "of how you're facing all this, of how you're working hard in treatment." A sad smile touched my son's lips. Maybe, or maybe he would be sad to see what I've become. A mental patient in an institution with no future, no— "Don't talk like that," I interrupted, grabbing his hands. "You have a future, Charlie. Different from what we imagined before, perhaps, but a future. And you have me. You will always have me." He squeezed my hands back, a gesture so simple but so significant at that moment. For an instant, brief but precious, we were just mother and son, sharing a pain, supporting each other. Not a woman visiting a psychiatric patient, not a young man trying to discern between reality and hallucination, just us, family. What remained of the family we once were. Months turned into years. 1997 gave way to 1998, then to 1999. Charlie remained at the therapeutic residence with ups and downs in his treatment. There were periods of admirable stability when he actively participated in the workshops, developed relationships with other residents, even showed interest in resuming some studies. And there were crises, some so severe they required temporary admissions to more intensive clinics. I continued my routine, the job at the medical clinic, which eventually turned into a more stable administrative position, the daily visits to Charlie, the maintenance of the small apartment that never really felt like home. A constant but empty existence, defined more by absences than by presences. The turn of the millennium brought news in the treatment of schizophrenia. More effective medications, with fewer side effects, innovative therapeutic approaches, greater understanding of the disease, its mechanisms, how to manage it in a more humane and efficient way. Charlie, then 22 years old, benefited from these innovations. Gradually, with the new medication, his crises became less frequent, less intense. The man in the hat, who had haunted him for years, began to appear less frequently until becoming an almost ghostly presence, a distant echo instead of a dominant voice. In 2001, something unexpected happened. The therapeutic residence initiated a partial reintegration program. More stable patients could spend a few days a week outside the institution, in controlled family environments, as part of the process of readaptation to community life. Charlie was one of the first selected. "He's ready," stated his psychiatrist, Dr. Lucille, who had been following his case for years. "He still needs supervision. He'll still have bad days. He still needs a structured environment. But he can benefit from more time at home, more autonomy, a more consistent connection with the outside world." I can't describe the mix of emotions I felt. Joy, hope, but also a paralyzing fear. What if he had a serious crisis while under my care? What if the triggers at home were too strong? What if I couldn't protect him, as I couldn't on that terrible night with the knife, years ago? But above all, there was the deep desire to have my son back, even if partially, even if under controlled conditions, to prepare his breakfast, to watch television together at night, to create new memories that weren't limited by the institutional walls of the residence. So, from September 2001, Charlie began spending weekends at home, from Friday night until Sunday afternoon. A nurse from the residence would bring him on Friday and pick him up on Sunday, ensuring that the transition was smooth, that the medication was taken correctly, that any sign of decompensation was identified early. They were precious weekends, despite the challenges. Charlie still had moments of disconnection, still occasionally conversed with invisible interlocutors, still needed rigid routines and calm environments. But there were also moments of surprising normalcy, when we cooked together, when we discussed a book we had both read, when we simply sat on the balcony, observing the city, sharing a comfortable silence. "Thank you for not giving up on me, Mom," he said one of those nights, his voice almost a whisper. "I know it hasn't been easy." "I would never give up on you," I replied, my throat tight with contained emotion. Never. The arrangement worked well enough that, in 2003, it was expanded. Charlie now spent 4 days at home, returning to the residence only from Monday to Wednesday for intensive therapies and medication adjustments when necessary. It was almost like having him back, almost like rebuilding a version of the family life I thought I had lost forever. Of course, it wasn't perfect. There were relapses, days when he would shut himself in his room, refusing to eat or talk, days when the look would become distant again, the voice mechanical. There were significant limitations in what we could do, in the places we could go, in the people we could interact with. Schizophrenia was still there, a constant presence in our lives, dictating rules, imposing barriers, but we were together. We were fighting, day after day, year after year. And somehow, we found small joys, small victories amid the constant battle. In 2005, 10 years after Charlie's initial diagnosis, 7 years after Philip's murder, I allowed myself something I hadn't dared in all that time. Hope. Not the naive hope of a miraculous cure, of a return to pre-disease normalcy, but the mature, realistic hope of a dignified life, with purpose, with moments of genuine happiness despite the limitations imposed by the condition. Charlie, then 27 years old, had found an interest that almost transformed into a vocation. Art. He discovered in painting a form of expression that seemed to circumvent the barriers of his fragmented mind. His paintings, abstract, intensely colored, often disturbing but always magnetic, began to attract attention not just from the therapists at the residence, but from visitors, from other professionals. A small exhibition was organized at the city's cultural center. Extraordinary Minds, it was called, presenting works by psychiatric patients from various institutions in Seattle. Charlie's paintings occupied an entire wall, standing out for their surprisingly refined technique, distinctive color palette, and the almost palpable energy they emanated. I was there on opening night, watching from a distance as my son, dressed in a dress shirt I had bought especially for the occasion, conversed with visitors, explained his creative process, received compliments with a mixture of shyness and pride. At times, it was impossible to distinguish him from any other emerging young artist. There were no external signs of the disease that consumed him inside, nothing that suggested the daily battles he fought just to remain connected to reality. That night, returning home in a taxi, Charlie would return to the residence with the therapeutic companions who supervised the event. I allowed myself to cry. Not tears of sadness or despair, as so many shed over the years, but tears of pride so intense it physically hurt in my chest. My son, against all odds, had found a voice, a way to communicate with the world, to transform the chaos in his mind into something tangible, something beautiful, something that touched other people. The disease hadn't completely defeated him. There were spaces where he could still flourish, could still truly be himself. And I, who for so many years saw myself only as a caregiver, as support, as a safety net, now allowed myself a new role, that of a proud mother celebrating her son's achievements no matter how different they were from what I once dreamed for him. Life would continue to be difficult. There would be more crises, more hospitalizations, more moments of despair. Schizophrenia is not a condition that simply disappears, even with the best available treatment. And the absence of Philip, that pain that became part of me, like a scar that never completely disappears, would still be felt on every birthday, every Christmas, every significant moment he wasn't there to share. But perhaps, just perhaps, there was room for more than just survival. Perhaps there was a possibility of small joys, of purpose, of meaning, even amid the ruins of what was once our life. And it was with that thought, not exactly hopeful, but at least not completely somber, that I moved forward, day by day, year by year, alongside my son, facing together the challenges a cruel fate imposed on us, finding beauty where we could, creating meaning from chaos, refusing to let tragedy have the last word in our story. It was in October 2008 that my life took yet another unexpected turn. Charlie, then 30 years old, had achieved a stability that allowed us an almost normal routine. He spent 5 days a week at home, returning to the therapeutic residence only for consultations and therapeutic activities. His medication was well adjusted, the crises had become rare, and he even occasionally sold some paintings through a gallery that specialized in art by psychiatric patients. I was 55 years old and still worked at the same medical clinic, now as an administrative manager. A simple life, without great excitements, but stable. Finally, after so many years of storm, it seemed we had found a safe harbor. That Monday morning, I was preparing to leave for work when I slipped on the bathroom rug. A silly fall, one of those that under normal circumstances would result in just a bruise and a story to tell. But I immediately felt that something was wrong. A searing pain in my right ankle, an almost instantaneous swelling. "Mom, is everything okay in there?" Charlie knocked on the door, his voice concerned. "I heard a noise." "I slipped, son," I replied, trying to sound calmer than I felt. "I think I hurt my ankle." He helped me out of the bathroom, supporting me to the bed. He examined my foot with surprising concentration, his delicate fingers probing around the swelling that was already forming. "We need to go to the hospital," he decided, surprising me with his lucidity and initiative. "It might be broken." And it was. "A fracture in the lateral malleolus," explained the doctor after examining the X-ray. "It wouldn't require surgery, but it would need 6 weeks of immobilization with a cast, followed by physical therapy and absolute rest in the first few days." "Do you live alone?" asked the doctor, a young man with deep, dark circles from consecutive shifts. "No," I replied, looking at Charlie sitting quietly in the chair beside me. "I live with my son." The doctor cast a quick glance at Charlie, perhaps noticing something in his behavior, the rhythmic swinging of his legs, the gaze that occasionally drifted to an empty spot in the room, the lips that moved in silent conversations. Doctors always notice these things. "And is there someone else who can help you in these first few days?" he insisted, with a tone that implicitly revealed his doubt about Charlie's ability to take care of me. "I have friends," I lied. I didn't really. Years caring for a schizophrenic son had reduced my social circle to almost nothing. "And I can hire someone if necessary." The doctor nodded, not entirely convinced. "I strongly recommend that you have help in the first few days at least. You won't be able to put weight on your foot. You'll need assistance for basic tasks such as bathing, preparing meals." We left the hospital with my foot in a cast, a prescription for painkillers, and a pamphlet with instructions about cast care. Charlie firmly held my arm while I balanced on the awkward crutches, guiding me to the taxi that would take us home. "I'm going to take care of you, Mom," he said as the car advanced through the streets of Seattle. Not the promise of an adult son to his elderly mother, but almost like a child determined to show that he is capable of a responsibility too great for his shoulders. "Thank you, son," I replied, my throat tight with a mixture of gratitude and concern. How much could he really do? For how long would his condition allow him to assume the role of caregiver when for so many years he had been the one who needed care? The first days went surprisingly well. Charlie proved attentive, dedicated, almost meticulous in following the medical instructions. He helped me to the bathroom, prepared simple meals, religiously checked the times for my medications. I called work, explaining the situation, and managed to get a 3-week medical leave. Dr. Lucille, Charlie's psychiatrist, made a home visit when she heard about the accident, an extraordinary gesture that demonstrated the special bond she had developed with us over the years. "How are you managing?" she asked after examining my ankle and approving the care we were taking. "Surprisingly well," I confessed. "Charlie has been wonderful. I hardly recognize my son in these last few days." She smiled, but her eyes revealed a professional concern that didn't escape my perception. "This is good, but we need to be vigilant," she said in a low voice while Charlie was in the kitchen preparing tea for us. "This sudden change of role, from patient to caregiver, can be stressful for him, even if he doesn't show it now. And stress is one of the main triggers for relapses in cases of schizophrenia." "What do you suggest?" I asked, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest that accompanied any conversation about possible crises. "I'll increase our sessions to twice a week, right here at home to make it easier. And I strongly suggest that you consider external help, a nurse a few hours a day perhaps, not only to help you, but to relieve the pressure on Charlie." I promised to think about it, although I knew our finances were tight. The health insurance would cover part of the physical therapy, but a private nurse would be a difficult luxury to sustain. The second week with the cast brought the first changes in Charlie's behavior. Subtle initially, a forgetfulness here, an irritability there. Nothing alarming, just signs of tiredness, I thought. Anyone would be exhausted taking care of someone 24 hours a day. It was on Thursday of that week that I noticed something more concerning. I woke up in the middle of the night thirsty and called for Charlie to help me get water. No response. I dragged myself to the bedroom door, supported by the crutches, and saw him sitting in the dark living room, animatedly conversing with someone who wasn't there. "But you don't understand," he was saying, gesturing to the empty sofa. "She depends on me now. I can't just—" He stopped abruptly when he perceived my presence. He turned with a sudden movement, his eyes wide reflecting the little light that came from the street. "Mom," he said, his voice strangely normal, as if he hadn't just been caught in a conversation with the air. "Do you need something?" "Just some water," I replied, pretending not to have seen or heard anything. Years of living with the disease had taught me when to confront and when to pretend normalcy. "Sorry to wake you up." He got up, solicitous, and went to the kitchen to get the water. I observed his movements, looking for other signs of decompensation. Were his hands shaking? Were his steps irregular? Was his posture too tense? He seemed normal, but I knew that appearances are deceiving when it comes to schizophrenia. The outer calm often hides an internal storm. In the days that followed, the episodes became more frequent, more difficult to ignore. Charlie spent long periods talking to himself in the bathroom, with the faucet running to disguise the sound. He forgot simple tasks, like giving me the medicines or preparing meals. One night, I found him in the kitchen at 3 a.m, all the cabinets open, dishes scattered on the floor. "I'm looking for the cameras," he explained when I asked what he was doing. "They're watching us, Mom. They want to know if I'm taking good care of you." I called Dr. Lucille the next morning. She adjusted Charlie's medication, increased the frequency of the sessions even more, and reiterated the need for external help. "It's no longer a suggestion, Dorothy," she said, with the gentle firmness that characterized her. "It's a medical necessity. Charlie is decompensating under the pressure. We need to alleviate that before he enters a complete crisis." I finally gave in. I used a part of the savings I kept for emergencies. Ironically, a fund I always thought would be used for some crisis of Charlie's, not to pay someone to take care of me, and hired a nursing technician to come 4 hours a day. Selma was a robust, middle-aged woman, with calloused hands and an easy smile. She had experience with psychiatric patients, which made her doubly valuable in our situation. She not only took care of me, baths, dressings, small exercises to prevent muscle atrophy, but also knew how to deal with Charlie on his bad days. "It's all right, young man," she would say when she caught him in conversation with his hallucinations. "Want to tell me what's bothering you today?" And surprisingly, he often would tell her. As if Selma's presence, someone from outside, not overburdened by the emotional weight of being his mother, created a safe space for him to admit his fears, his confusions. "The man in the hat is back," he confessed one afternoon, while Selma was changing my dressing. "He says I'm not taking good care of my mother, that she's going to die because of me, like my father died." My heart tightened to hear that. After so many years, Charlie still carried the guilt for Philip's death, still believed, at some level, that he could have prevented the tragedy. Selma didn't miss a beat. "And do you believe him?" she asked casually, as if discussing the weather. Charlie hesitated. "Sometimes," he finally admitted, "when I'm very tired." "Well, I think the man in the hat doesn't know what he's talking about," Selma replied, finishing the dressing with a gentle pat on my leg. "I've never seen a son who takes such good care of his mother as you do. And I've worked in many homes." I saw something change in Charlie's face, a relaxation, a decrease in the tension that had been building up in recent days. Just a few simple words, without judgment, from someone he didn't need to emotionally protect. It was at that moment that I realized our mother-son dynamic, however loving it was also part of the problem. Charlie felt responsible not just for my physical care, but for my emotional well-being. He tried to hide his struggles, his voices, his fears, to not worry me, which only increased his internal pressure. Selma's presence created an escape valve, a third point in our closed system that allowed the release of accumulated tensions. In the following weeks, with her help 4 hours a day and frequent visits from Dr. Lucille, we managed to establish a fragile but functional balance. My ankle gradually improved. After 6 weeks, the cast was removed, revealing pale, dry skin and a visibly thinner limb due to inactivity. I began physical therapy 3 times a week, using a special transportation for people with reduced mobility that the city's social assistance provided. With each small progress, the first step without crutches, the first time I managed to bathe alone, the day I returned to work, initially part-time, Charlie also seemed to improve a little, as if my physical recovery was somehow linked to his mental stability. We continued with Selma's help even after my physical recovery was well advanced. 2 hours a day, 3 times a week, enough to give Charlie time for himself, a respite from the constant responsibility he felt for me. It was during one of those afternoons, almost 4 months after my fall, that something extraordinary happened. I returned earlier from physical therapy. The therapist had had an emergency and ended the session halfway. I opened the door silently, not wanting to interrupt in case Charlie was in the middle of one of his painting sessions, which required absolute concentration. The living room was empty, but I heard voices coming from the kitchen. I approached slowly, leaning slightly on the cane that now replaced the crutches. "And then she said my painting was visceral and cathartic," Charlie was saying, his voice animated in a way I rarely heard. "I'm not sure exactly what that means, but from the way she said it, it was a compliment." "Of course it was a compliment," Selma's voice replied, followed by the sound of dishes being handled. "That blue painting you showed me? It's truly spine-tingling. You can feel the emotion jumping off the canvas." I stopped at the door, observing the scene without being noticed. Charlie and Selma were side by side at the counter, preparing some kind of dough. Flour partially covered his face, and Selma had a dish towel thrown over her shoulder. They looked normal, like 2 friends cooking together, laughing, talking about art and life. "Do you think one day I could have an exhibition just for me?" Charlie asked, his voice suddenly shy, vulnerable. "Not just those patient art ones, but a real one, in a normal gallery." "And why couldn't you?" Selma replied, nudging him slightly with her elbow. "You have talent to spare. And look, my nephew works at a small gallery in the Capitol Hill neighborhood. I can talk to him, see if he'll come take a look at your paintings." Charlie's face lit up with such pure, genuine hope that I felt tears in my eyes. I silently retreated, deciding to go around and enter, making more noise, announcing my arrival. That moment was too precious to be interrupted. that simple human connection my son rarely managed to establish with people outside the medical therapeutic circle. In the months that followed, Selma became more than a caregiver. She became a friend, almost part of the family. Her nephew, Leonard, really did come to see Charlie's paintings and was impressed enough to organize a small exhibition at the gallery where he worked. Contemporary art of the Northwest was how he classified the works, without any mention of Charlie's condition. Just art, judged on its own merit. The opening was in July 2009, on a cool evening of the Seattle summer. A small, intimate event with cheap wine and simple hors d'oeuvres. But for us, it was like the most spectacular gala night in the world. Charlie, nervous but determined, wore the blue shirt that had been Philip's, carefully stored all these years. I wore a new dress, the first I had bought in years, and even allowed myself a trip to the hairdresser. As we entered the gallery and saw Charlie's paintings hanging on the white walls, illuminated by directional spots, labeled with his full name and titles he had chosen himself, something permanently changed in our dynamic. We were no longer just the overprotective mother and the sick son. We were Dorothy and Charles Phillip, a proud woman and a rising artist. 3 paintings were sold that night, one of them to an art professor from the University of Washington, who had no idea that the artist whose work he admired lived with schizophrenia. "There's a dreamlike quality in your work," he said to Charlie, who listened attentively, his hands trembling slightly with the mixture of emotion and nervousness. "A certain depersonalization that reminds me of Magritte, but with a more intense palette, almost feverish. Fascinating." I saw my son grow 5 inches with that comment, his chest expanding with a pride that had nothing to do with delusions of grandeur and everything to do with the genuine validation of his talent. On the way back home, Charlie was silent for several minutes, looking out the taxi window, the city lights reflecting on his thoughtful face. "You know, Mom," he finally said, his voice low but firm, "I think Dad would have liked tonight." I swallowed the lump in my throat before answering. "I'm sure he would, son. Absolutely sure." It was a turning point in our lives. The accident that initially seemed like a catastrophe, me immobilized, dependent, Charlie forced into a role for which he didn't seem prepared, ended up becoming the catalyst for changes we would never have initiated voluntarily. My son found not only a form of expression through art, but also a purpose, an identity beyond the disease. I found the courage to loosen the reins a bit, to trust that the world could sometimes be gentle with him, that people like Selma and Leonard existed and could see beyond the medical labels. Schizophrenia didn't disappear, of course. There were still bad days, occasional crises, medication adjustments. The man in the hat still appeared in moments of greater stress, but now we shared the burden, not just between the two of us, but with a small support network that grew organically. Selma, Leonard, other artists from the gallery, an expressive therapy group that Charlie began to attend. Today, sitting in this rocking chair, looking at the walls of my living room decorated with my son's paintings, some he insisted I keep, others I bought at his exhibitions, proud as any mother would be, I think about how life takes unpredictable turns. That fall in the bathroom, which seemed like a minor tragedy adding to all the major tragedies we had already faced, ended up being a blessing in disguise. A detour in the path that led us to landscapes we would never have discovered otherwise. Charlie is now 47 years old. He still lives with schizophrenia, still has his limitations, still needs certain supervision and support. But he is also a recognized artist in specialized circuits, occasionally gives talks about art and mental health, has a small circle of friends. A life I never imagined would be possible in those dark days of initial diagnosis, of hospitalizations, of violent crises. And me? I'm here, at 72 years old, sharing this story with you, perhaps to give hope to other parents facing the diagnosis of a beloved child, perhaps to show that the stories of families affected by severe mental illnesses don't always end in tragedy, or perhaps just because, after so many years keeping this story inside me, I feel it's time to let it out, to transform it into something that might, somehow, help others. If you've made it this far, my dear, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I know it wasn't an easy story to hear, but I hope you found something useful in it, something that resonates with your own journey, whatever it may be. Before I say goodbye, I'd like to ask a small favor. If this story touched your heart in any way, please leave a like, subscribe to Grandparents' Tales so you don't miss our next life stories. Each week, I share experiences that might help illuminate the path for those still on their journey. This old lady sends you a tight hug, full of affection. And remember, no matter how dark the night, the sun always rises again. Always.